Let's begin by simply noticing the weight of your body, feeling supported, feeling safe, and as you sink a little deeper into that comfort, you might imagine a gentle warmth, like the memory of a sun-baked stone spreading slowly through you. A story is here waiting for you. There is nothing to understand, nothing to analyze. It is just a soft and simple thread for you to follow if you wish, a thread that leads us back in time to the warm, golden lands of ancient Egypt. Before we drift too far, if you feel a connection to this quiet place, you're welcome to leave a quiet like or subscribe. Think of it not as a task, but as leaving a soft footprint in the sand before you continue your journey inward. And if you feel so moved, you can let me know in the comments where you are listening from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's a nice way to feel connected, even as we prepare for sleep. And so find that gentle darkness in your room, perhaps with a soft blanket pulled a little closer, as we begin our slow drift into tonight's tale. The air is warm, thick with the scent of river mud, lotus blossoms, and something ancient, like dust in time itself. You are on the water now, gliding silently. Your vessel is a simple skiff made of papyrus reeds, bound tightly together, and it rocks with a rhythm that is hypnotic and slow. The great river, the lifeblood of this entire civilization, carries you along. The Nile. To your left and right, a narrow band of impossible green bursts from the dark, rich soil. The gift of the river's annual flood. Beyond that, rising up like golden walls, is Deshret, the red land, the endless, unforgiving desert. For the people who live here, this duality is everything: life and death, order and chaos. The fertile black and the sterile red. You drift past farmers working in the fields, their movements unhurried, dictated by a cycle that has been repeating for 1,000 years. You see children splashing at the water's edge, their laughter carrying across the water like tiny bells. In the distance, the sharp, perfect triangles of the Great Pyramids slice into a sky of the deepest, clearest blue. Everything you see speaks of permanence, of stability, of a cosmic order that is as predictable as the rising sun. You might be tempted to think that in a world so perfectly arranged, there are no secrets, that everything is exactly as it appears, solid, golden, and eternal. But the river knows better. This river has seen it all. It's the source of their greatest anxieties and their greatest relief. Every year, they would watch and wait, praying the flood would be just right. Too low, and famine would stalk the land. Too high, and it would wash away entire villages. To personify this terrifyingly powerful force, they imagined a god named Happy, the spirit of the inundation. And here's a funny little detail. Happy was depicted as a man, but with a large, sagging belly and full breasts, symbols of fertility and nourishment usually associated with women. It was a sign that even in their most fundamental concepts, the Egyptians understood that life isn't always one thing or the other. It's a bit of a mix. Historians and archaeologists still debate just how accurately the ancient priests could predict the flood's height using their nilometers. Stone staircases and pillars submerged in the river with markings to measure its rise. Knowing whether the year would bring abundance or scarcity was the ultimate source of power, a secret held by a select few. Control the information, control the kingdom. And that's the thing about this place. For all its monumental openness, its power lies in what is controlled, what is measured, and what is unspoken. As your boat continues its gentle journey, you notice the sun beginning to dip lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. The world seems to slow down even more. The farmers head home. The children are called indoors. A profound quiet begins to settle over the land, broken only by the lapping of water against your skiff and the distant call of an ibis. It's in this quiet, in the growing shadows between the perfect temples and the orderly fields, that you might begin to wonder. In a society this obsessed with balance and presentation, what happens to the things that don't fit? What happens to the people, the desires, the stories that might throw that perfect balance into chaos? They don't simply vanish. They just become harder to see. They become whispers, whispers on the Nile. The skiff has found the riverbank now, bumping softly against the reeds. The air has cooled, and the sky above it cloth pricked with countless silver stars. There are no city lights here to dim their brilliance, and you feel as though you can see into the true depth of the universe. In this profound stillness, you begin to understand that the order you saw in the daylight wasn't just about farming cycles or social structures. It was a reflection of something much, much bigger. It was a concept the Egyptians called Mayat. There is no single word in our language that quite captures it. Mayat is truth, justice, balance, harmony, and cosmic order all rolled into one. It is the fundamental principle that keeps the universe running smoothly. It is the sun rising every morning, the Nile flooding every year, the stars moving in their predictable courses. It is the force that holds back the endless, terrifying chaos. A chaos they call Disfet, that is always pressing at the edges of their world. Mayat is personified as a goddess, serene and beautiful, holding a scepter and an ankh, the symbol of life. But her most important feature is the single, perfect ostrich feather she wears in her hair. That one feather is the measure of everything. For you standing on the banks of the Nile in this ancient night, Mayat would feel as real as the ground beneath your feet. It dictates that the Pharaoh, who is a living god, must rule justly. It dictates that the nobles must manage their estates, the soldiers must defend the borders, and the farmers must till the soil. Everyone has a place, and as long as everyone stays in their place and does their part, the great cosmic machine runs perfectly. It's a deeply comforting idea. It means your life has meaning, your role is important, and the universe is not a random, hostile place. It's a kingdom of order, built to last for eternity. This belief followed them even beyond death. You've probably seen the images from their funerary texts, the ones we call the Book of the Dead. They show the final judgment, the weighing of the heart. After a long and perilous journey through the underworld, a soul would arrive in the Hall of Two Truths. There, the great god Anubis, with the head of a jackal, would take the person's heart, the seat of their intelligence, memory, and morality, and place it on one side of a massive golden scale, on the other side, the single, weightless ostrich feather of Mayat. The soul would then have to make a series of negative confessions, declaring all the bad things they hadn't done. I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not caused pain. And all the while, a terrifying creature would be watching, waiting. Her name was Mimit, the devourer of the dead. She was a monstrous hybrid, with the head of a crocodile, the torso of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. A combination of the three most feared animals in their world. If your heart, heavy with misdeeds, tipped the scales against the feather, Mimit would lunge forward and devour it. And that was it. No second chance. Your existence would be over forever. You would simply cease to be. Historians still argue about the true nature of this judgment. Was it a literal by every person, a terrifying final exam they spent their whole lives preparing for? Or was it also a powerful form of social control, a story told by the priests and the pharaohs to encourage good behavior and maintain the strict social hierarchy? Perhaps it was both. But the effect is the same. When the price of disorder is eternal oblivion, you learn to be very, very careful. You build your life like a perfect temple, making sure every stone is in its place, every surface is smooth, and every carving tells the right story. You present a life that is in perfect balance with Mayat. But this creates a new kind of pressure. It means that anything within you that feels unbalanced, anything that doesn't fit the perfect design, must be hidden. It must be buried deep, where no one can see it. Not the scribes, not the priests, and certainly not the gods with their all-seeing eyes and their perfectly balanced scales. The night is past, and a new sun rises, just as Mayat decreed it would. The light that washes over the land now is not the soft, forgiving glow of twilight, but a brilliant, white gold. You find yourself in a city now, perhaps Thebes, the great capital. And you are walking towards its heart, one of the vast temple complexes. It is a city within a city, a fortress of faith built on a scale that seems impossible for human hand. You pass through a colossal gateway, a pylon, covered from top to bottom with carved images. They show the pharaoh, depicted as a giant, smiting the enemies of Egypt with a mace. He is the defender of order, the champion of Mayat. Inside you enter a forest of stone. columns shaped like giant papyrus stalks, so vast that a dozen people holding hands couldn't circle one, soar towards the sky. The air is cool and smells of incense. Every surface is covered in hieroglyphs, a story written in granite, telling tales of divine births, cosmic battles, and triumphant military campaigns. You feel small here, insignificant, a temporary visitor in a place built for eternity and for the gods. This is the public face of Egypt. This is the power, the perfection, and the order of Mayat made manifest in stone. It is a story designed to awe you into submission, to remind you of your place in the great scheme of things. But step outside the temple's sacred precinct, away from the cool, silent stone and back into the glare of the sun. You turn down a narrow, dusty alleyway, and the world changes instantly. The houses are made of simple mud brick, packed tightly together. Here there is no reverent silence. There is the shouting of merchants, the braying of a donkey, the laughter and squabbles of children, the smell of baking bread, lentils, and something less pleasant, like garbage left too long in the heat. This is where most people actually live, and their lives are not carved in stone. They are messy, complicated, and very, very human. The ancient Egyptians, especially the upper classes, were famously obsessed with cleanliness and appearance. It was a part of maintaining Mayat on a personal level. You would see priests with their heads and bodies completely shaved, to be ritually pure before the gods. Wealthy men and women wore fine, white linen garments, which are notoriously difficult to keep clean. They used makeup, both black coal and green malachite, around their eyes, not just for beauty, but because they believed it had magical healing properties and protected them from the sun's glare and flies. It was a constant battle against the grit and grime of daily life. The interesting thing about this obsession with purity is what it impurity that was always threatening to creep in. And here's something to consider. We are surrounded by a world of text, these hieroglyphs on the temple walls. It's easy to assume that this was a satiety of readers, that everyone understood the grand stories being told about the pharaoh and the gods. But that is a powerful illusion. Historians still argue passionately over the exact percentage of the population that was literate, but most agree it was incredibly low. Perhaps only 1 or 2%, primarily professional scribes, high-ranking priests, and the royal court. For everyone else, those grand carvings on the temple walls might as well have been complex wallpaper. Their understanding of the world came from spoken words, from stories passed down from rumors, from jokes, from whispers. So you have two realities existing side by side. The official reality, written in stone, perfect and unchanging. And the lived reality, noisy, smelly, and fleeting. In this world of strict order, where does human nature go? Where do the frustrations, the illicit desires, the unorthodox ideas, and the inconvenient truths get hidden? They go into the shadows. The brighter the sun of Mayat shines, the darker the shadows it casts. Hidden in plain sight from the all-seeing eye of the state, that we must look for the stories that were never meant to be carved in stone. The city's noise begins to fade as you are welcomed into the courtyard of a large house. The sun has set, the day's work is done, and the air is mercifully cool. A small fire crackles in a clay brazier, casting flickering shadows that dance on the high mud brick walls. This is where the real stories are told, not the grand, sanitized epics on the temple pylons, but the complicated, messy, and far more interesting tales that people whisper to each other when the formal world is put to rest. And there is one story, a divine epic, that is so central to their worldview, yet so strange that it was rarely depicted in full on those public monuments. It's the story of the great contest for the throne of Egypt. It's a tale of two gods, Horus and his uncle, Seth. You already know the backstory. It's a classic. The good and wise king, Osiris, is murdered and dismembered by his jealous, chaotic brother, Seth. Osiris's devoted wife, Isis, uses her powerful magic to find and reassemble his body, breathing life back into him just long enough to conceive a son, Horus. Horus is then raised in secret, hidden in the papyrus swamps, until he is old enough to avenge his father and claim his rightful throne. So far, so good. It's a straightforward tale of order versus chaos, of rightful succession against usurpation. But when Horus comes of age and confronts Seth, it doesn't lead to a single decisive battle. Instead, what follows is a long, bizarre, and frankly ridiculous series of contests, judged by the other gods. It's like a divine legal drama that drags on for, according to the texts, 80 years. They have a boat race, where Seth cleverly builds a boat of stone, which immediately sinks, while Horus builds one from pine wood covered in plaster to look like stone. They transform themselves into hippopotami and try to hold their breath underwater, a contest Isis has to break up before they kill each other. But one night, the story takes a much darker and more significant turn. Seth, pretending to want reconciliation, invites his young nephew to his house to spend the night. And in the darkness, Seth assaults Horus. The act is not one of passion, it is an act of pure domination. Seth's goal is to humiliate Horus, to prove that he is the weaker one, the one who can be taken and subjugated. By doing this, Seth believes he can prove to the other gods that Horus is effeminate, unfit to be king. But Horus is clever. He doesn't just submit. He secretly catches his uncle's seed in his hand. Horrified and defiled, he runs to his mother Isis. And this is where the story gets truly strange. Isis, ever the pragmatist, immediately cuts off Horus's contaminated hand and throws it in the marsh. Then she devises a plan. She takes some of Horus's own seed and spreads it on Seth's favorite food, lettuce. Now, this might seem completely random to us, but for the Egyptians, it was loaded with meaning. They considered lettuce to be a powerful aphrodisiac, and its milky sap was associated with male virility and the fertility god Min. Historians still debate the precise symbolism, but the connection between lettuce and masculine potency was undeniable. The next day, Seth, completely unaware, eats the lettuce from his garden. Soon after, they are all back in the divine courtroom. Seth stands before the assembled gods and makes his triumphant claim. I have dominated Horus. He believes he has won. The gods are in an uproar, but Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, devises a test. He calls for Seth's seed to show itself, and it answers from the marsh where Isis threw the hand. It has no power over Horus. Then, Thoth calls for Horus's seed. A golden solar disk emerges from Seth's own forehead. The humiliation is absolute and cosmic. The attempt to dominate has been perfectly inverted. Seth, the symbol of aggressive, chaotic masculinity, has been made to carry the seed of his rival. It is the ultimate no-you moment in Egyptian mythology. You remain in that quiet courtyard, the fire now a bed of glowing embers. The story of Horus and Seth hangs in the air, not just as a piece of divine gossip, but as something deeply unsettling. You can almost feel the collective shiver that would have run through an ancient Egyptian audience hearing it. Because what Seth did to Horus wasn't just a physical act, it was a profound, symbolic attack on his very essence, his right to rule, his place in the cosmos. It was a cosmic insult, and understanding why it was so potent unlocks a secret door into the Egyptian mind. For them, the key to the whole sordid affair wasn't the intimacy between two males. It was about power. Specifically, it was about the roles of active and passive, dominant and submissive, in their worldview, which was deeply patriarchal. The ideal man, the ideal god, was always the active, dominant force. He was the penetrator, the one who asserted his will upon the world. This was the very definition of masculine strength. To be on the receiving end, to be the one who was penetrated, was to be made passive, submissive, female, and in their hierarchical world, that was the greatest humiliation imaginable for a male. It was to have your fundamental nature inverted. Seth's goal was not to express desire but to inflict a political and social wound. By forcing Horus into the passive role, he was trying to argue, on a cosmic level, that Horus was not a man fit to rule other men. He was trying to say, look at him. He is no better than a woman. How can he be your king? The fact that Horus cleverly turns the tables, making Seth the unwitting carrier of his seed, is the entire point of the story. It's not just a clever trick, it's a restoration of Maya. Horus proves he is the truly dominant one, the one with the cunning and the divine support to outmaneuver his chaotic uncle. The golden disc emerging from Seth's forehead is Horus's masculinity, his right to the solar throne, made manifest for all to see. This obsession with active versus passive roles pops up in some fascinating ways. Take, for example, their view of creation. One of their primary creation myths starts with the god Atum, who emerges from the primordial chaos. Atum is all alone, so how does he create the next generation of gods? The texts delicately explain that he creates them through an act of self-pleasuring. While this might seem strange to us, to the Egyptians it was perfectly logical. It established Atum as the ultimate active force, a being so potent that he could generate the entire cosmos from his own body without needing a partner. He is the ultimate dominant entity. Even their insults were structured around this principle. One of the most severe curses you could level at a man was to say that he would be taken as a woman is taken. It was a threat of total annihilation. And this idea permeated their legal system, though perhaps not in the way we'd expect. There are very few surviving legal texts from ancient Egypt that explicitly outlaw same-sex acts. The state didn't seem particularly concerned with legislating what people did in private. What they were concerned with was status and reputation. The crime wasn't the act itself, the shame was in being the passive partner. Whether this shame had formal legal consequences is a subject of ongoing debate among Egyptologists. It's more likely that the social consequences, ridicule, loss of status, being seen as weak or unmanly, were so severe that they were a far more effective punishment than any law. So as you sit there in the cool night air, you realize that the story of the two gods isn't just mythology. It's a cultural blueprint. It's a dramatic, over-the-top lesson that everyone, from the pharaoh down to the humblest farmer, would have understood instinctively. It's a story that screams one central message. Your masculinity is your power, and it must be defended at all costs. To lose control, even for a moment, is to risk losing everything. The storyteller has finished, the embers of the fire have died, and the courtyard is now lit only by the faint, milky glow of the distant stars. You're left alone with the echoes of that strange divine scandal. It's clear the story is a powerful warning about dominance and the preservation of masculine honor. But as you ponder its meaning, you realize it's not that simple. Like so many things in this ancient land, the story is a set of nesting dolls, with meanings hidden inside of meanings. So what was this story really for? What were the Egyptians doing with this bizarre tale of divine lawsuits and cosmic humiliation? The truth is, we don't know for sure. It's one of those areas where you can almost hear the quiet, polite arguments happening in the halls of modern academia. What gods do, men are not necessarily meant to imitate. One very practical theory is that the story is a piece of political propaganda. The contest between Horus and Seth was often seen as a mythological reflection of the very real, historical unification of Egypt. In the beginning, there were two lands, Upper Egypt in the south, represented by the chaotic and powerful god Seth, and Lower Egypt in the north, the Nile Delta, represented by Horus. The story of Horus finally triumphing over Seth and becoming the ruler of a united kingdom served as a divine charter for the pharaoh's rule. It explained why there was one king, not two, and why the lineage of Horus was the rightful one. The scandalous details might have been added over time to further discredit Seth and the political factions that might have still revered him. Another interpretation sees the story not as history, but as a complex psychological drama. Seth is not just a political rival, he is the embodiment of everything that threatens order. He is chaos, violence, the raging desert storm, unpredictable and destructive. Horus is order, rightful succession, the calm, life-giving Nile. Their eternal struggle represents the precarious balance of the universe itself. The assault is a metaphor for chaos attempting to subvert order in the most fundamental way possible. Horus's victory isn't just a personal win. It's being restored a reassurance that despite the terrifying power of chaos, order will ultimately prevail through cunning and divine favor. And then there's a more subtle interpretation, one that's gained more traction in recent years. Perhaps the story also functions as a kind of safety valve. In a society so incredibly rigid, so obsessed with purity and a perfect public image, there had to be a place to explore the messy, darker aspects of existence. The world of the gods was that place. The gods could be petty, jealous, lustful, and downright foolish in ways that humans couldn't. At least not publicly. By telling stories like this, they could explore complex themes of power, sexuality, and shame in a safe, metaphorical space. It's a way of saying, yes, these forces exist in the universe, but they belong to the world of gods and myths, not to our well-ordered human society. Here's a curious little fact that adds another layer of complexity. Seth was not always the villain. In some earlier periods of Egyptian history, and particularly for certain dynasties of pharaohs, Seth was a powerful and revered deity. He was the god of strength, the desert, and foreigners. Some pharaohs even incorporated his name into their own, like Seti I, which means man of Seth. This suggests that his reputation changed over time, evolving from a respected but dangerous god into the archetypal enemy of order. The story of his conflict with Horus likely evolved along with him, becoming more scandalous and more damning as his political importance waned. The very idea of who is the good guy and who is the bad guy is, it seems, subject to historical revision. So as you leave the courtyard and walk through the sleeping city, the story no longer seems like a simple lesson. It's a political document, a psychological exploration, and a piece of evolving theology all at once. It's a stark reminder that what the gods do is often a warning for what men shouldn't. And it reinforces a powerful social code. These chaotic, dominating urges exist, but they are the domain of a disgraced god. A respectable man, a man of Mayet, must rise above them, always presenting a front of controlled, active, and unimpeachable masculinity. The story's ambiguity leaves you wondering, if this is the divine ideal, what did the human reality look like? You leave the grand city of Thebes behind, traveling north. The landscape begins to change, the cliffs along the Nile receding, the strip of green widening. You are heading towards the ancient heartland of the kingdom, near the old capital of Memphis. Your destination is a place of the dead, the vast necropolis of Sakava, where nobles and high officials have been building their tombs for thousands of years, a silent testament to the Egyptian obsession with the afterlife. You are not here to see the great pyramids or the famous temples. You are looking for something more intimate, something that was hidden from the world for the 3 millennia. You find a guide, an old man with eyes that have seen the sun rise over these sands 1,000 times, and he leads you to a specific mastaba, a type of tomb with a flat roof and sloping sides, a house of eternity for a wealthy official. This one looks unremarkable from the outside, just another sand-blasted block of limestone among hundreds. It was discovered by archaeologists in 1964, buried deep beneath a causeway built for a later king. It was a tomb that time had forgotten. Your guide lights a torch, and you descend the steep, narrow staircase into the cool, silent darkness. The air is still and dry, smelling of dust and stone. The torchlight flickers, throwing long, dancing shadows. You are entering the world of 2 men who lived and worked during the 5th dynasty, around 2400 BC. Their names were Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep. The carvings on the wall tell you their story, or at least, the official version of it. They were important men, holding a shared and rather unusual title. Overseers of the Manichaeists of the Great House. The Great House means the Pharaoh's palace. So these were not just any Manichaeists to the king himself. This might sound trivial to us, but in the Egyptian court, proximity to the pharaoh's body was a position of immense trust and prestige. You had to be a loyal and respected member of the elite to be allowed to touch the living god. They were, in a sense, keepers of the king's purity. As you move deeper into the tomb, you see that it is a shared space. Both their names are carved with equal prominence. Both their families are depicted. Niankhkhnum's wife and children are shown as Khnumhotep's. On the surface, it looks like the tomb of 2 very close colleagues, perhaps business partners or brothers, who were so connected in life that they chose to be buried together for eternity. This in itself was unusual, but not completely unheard of. But then, you start to notice the details. The artists who decorated this tomb were masters, and every gesture, every position, is deliberate. In scenes of daily life, where you might expect to see each man with his own wife, you instead see Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep together. They are shown overseeing the work on their estates, hunting in the marshes, and supervising the funerary offerings. In these scenes, They stand in for each other in the traditional role of the husband. Khnumhotep is shown with Niankhkhnum's family, and vice versa. Their lives appear completely intertwined. One small, easily missed detail speaks volumes. In many tombs, you find graffiti left by the artists and workmen who built it. They are often just doodles or practice sketches. Here in this tomb, someone sketched a simple image of two male gazelles, an animal often used in Egyptian poetry as a term of endearment for a beloved. It's a tiny, human touch, a whisper of a comment from the people who spent months in this very space, carefully carving the images that would last for eternity. Whether this was a random doodle or a subtle commentary on the tomb's occupants is something we can never know. Historians are divided on its significance, with some dismissing it as coincidence and others seeing it as a key piece of evidence. As you stand in the flickering torchlight, a strange feeling settles over you. This tomb feels different from the others. The formal, rigid poses of Egyptian art seem to soften here. There's a warmth and intimacy that feels personal. You are not just looking at a monument to a court official's status. You are standing in a space that feels like a secret, a story that the owners perhaps only intended for themselves and for the gods. The Manichaeist secret tomb is beginning to reveal that it holds more than just the bodies of two men. It holds a profound and challenging mystery. You move deeper into the tomb, into the main offering chapel. This is the heart of the House of Eternity, the place where living relatives would come to leave food and drink for the souls of the deceased. The torchlight seems to brighten here, reflecting off the smooth, plastered limestone walls that are covered in the most beautifully preserved paintings. The colors are still vibrant after more than 4,000 years. The rich ochre of the men's skin, the crisp white of their linen kilts, the deep black of their wigs and eyeliner. And it is here, in this most sacred and central part of the tomb, that you see the image that has sparked decades of debate. It is a scene at a banquet table, a common motif in Egyptian tombs, representing the eternal feast the deceased will enjoy in the afterlife. The two men, Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep, are shown seated together. But it is their pose that makes you stop and stare. In typical Egyptian art, if a husband and wife are shown at a banquet, they might sit side by side, perhaps with the wife's arm resting gently on her husband's shoulder. It's a sign of affection, but still quite formal. The two men are depicted in the most intimate embrace ever found in a private tomb from this era. They are face to face, so close that their noses are touching. This nose-to-nose pose is highly significant. In Egyptian art, it is the closest you get to a kiss, a gesture of profound affection and intimacy usually reserved for a husband and his wife, or a mother and her child. Khnumhotep has his arm wrapped around Niankhkhnum's shoulders, pulling him close. Niankhkhnum's own arm is wrapped around Khnumhotep's back. They are not just sitting next to each other, they are holding each other in a close, personal embrace. Their bodies are pressed together, their faces mirroring each other. You look around the chamber, and you see this theme of intimacy repeated. In another scene, one that would traditionally show a husband and wife walking arm in arm, you see the two men instead. They are holding hands, a simple gesture, but one loaded with meaning in the highly codified world of Egyptian art. In yet another depiction, they stand on a papier skiff, hunting in the marshes, a scene that is a powerful symbol of overcoming the forces of chaos. They often occupy the space and the poses that, in any other tomb, would belong to the deceased and his wife. The wife is not absent. She is depicted elsewhere in the tomb, smaller and in a less prominent position. But in these key, central scenes of eternal life, it is the two men who are together. There's a curious detail in their clothing. They are both wearing elaborate, pleated kilts and broad beaded collars, the attire of high-ranking officials. But look closer at their scent cones. These were cones of perfumed animal fat or wax worn on the head during parties. As the evening went on, the heat would cause the cone to slowly melt, releasing its fragrance and covering the wig and shoulders in a glistening sheen. Some art historians have pointed out that the specific style of their cones and the way their garments are depicted echo scenes from funerary rites, suggesting a union that transcends life and is meant to endure in the great beyond. The academic world has been in a quiet, century-long argument about how to interpret these images. Are we looking at brothers, perhaps even twins, who had an unusually close bond? Or is this something else entirely? The embrace itself is the crux of the debate. Some scholars argue it's simply a strong statement of friendship and professional partnership, pushing the boundaries of artistic convention. Others, however, are adamant that this pose in this context can only be interpreted as romantic. To place such an image at the very center of their eternal home was a bold and unambiguous statement. As you stand there in the silent, torchlit chamber, you are confronted with a powerful question. You are looking at a language of gestures, a story told in poses. And after 4,000 years you have to wonder, are we reading it right, or are we just seeing what we want to see? The torch sputters, a small reminder that your time in this ancient, sealed space is limited. The silence in the tomb is absolute, broken only by the sound of your own quiet breathing. And in this silence, the arguments of the modern world seem to echo off the painted walls. Brothers or something more? The question hangs in the still air, and the two men in the painting offer no clear answer. They just hold their intimate pose, their noses forever touching, their gaze locked for eternity. Let's weigh the evidence, just as the historians do. The brothers' theory is the most conservative and, for a long time, was the most widely accepted. Proponents of this view point out that family bonds were incredibly strong in ancient Egypt. Sharing a tomb, while unusual, was not impossible for two brothers who were exceptionally close, especially if they shared a profession and a high social status. Their names even offer a clue. Niankhkhnum means life, belongs to Khnum, and Khnumhotep means Khnum is satisfied. Khnum was the ram-headed creator god who was said to fashion human beings on his potter's wheel. The similarity in their names could suggest a family connection, perhaps even that they were twins, given the balanced, mirrored nature of their names and their depictions in the tomb. In this interpretation, the intimate embrace is seen as a symbol of their unity in life and their desire to be reborn together in the afterlife. It's a statement of familial love, amplified by the conventions of Egyptian art. They argue that applying a modern understanding of romantic relationships to a 4,400-year-old culture is a mistake, a form of historical projection. They would say we are seeing love where the Egyptians may have only intended to show loyalty. But then you have the other side of the argument. Those who believe Niankhkhnum Khnumhotep were a couple have compelling evidence of their own. They argue that the brothers' theory simply doesn't account for the sheer number of artistic choices made in this tomb that deviate from the norm. Why are the wives relegated to less important scenes? Why do the two men consistently occupy the spousal role in the most significant symbolic depictions of eternal life? There is the embrace itself. Scholars on this side of the debate have scoured thousands of images from other tombs, and they maintain that a pose of this intimacy, nose to nose, face to face, is simply without parallel between two men of the same social standing. It is a pose reserved for husband and wife. To use it here, they argue, was a deliberate and radical statement. There's also a strange little detail in the hieroglyphs of their names. In some places in the tomb, their names are written in a way that joins them together, almost like a single unit. The final symbol of Niankhkhnum's name, Khnum, is also the first symbol of Khnumhotep's. The scribes sometimes merged them, so the two names flowed into one. This linguistic fusion is incredibly rare and has been interpreted by some as a literal joining of their two identities. Academics are still fiercely debating the grammatical and symbolic meaning of this. Is it just a clever, space-saving trick by the scribe, or is it a profound statement about their bond, a sort of ancient Egyptian portmanteau representing their union? So you are left with two competing narratives. One is safe, conventional, and fits neatly into the traditional understanding of ancient Egyptian society. The other is radical, challenging, and suggests a reality that the official record, the grand temple carvings and the king lists, never acknowledges. It suggests that there was space, at least for two wealthy and well-connected individuals, to express a form of love and commitment that existed outside the rigid heterosexual, procreative norms that society was built upon. The truth is, we will likely never know for certain. The two men took their secret with them to this tomb. But the existence of the debate itself is what is truly important. It forces us to question our assumptions. It reminds us that ancient societies were not monolithic blocks of tradition. They were filled with individuals who made choices, who may have loved in ways we don't fully understand, and who found ways to express that love, even if only in the silent, eternal privacy of their own tomb. The tomb of Niankhkhnum doesn't give us a clear answer, but it gives us a beautiful, profound, and deeply human question. You ascend from the quiet, intimate world of the tomb, climbing back up the narrow stairs into the bright, hot light of the Egyptian sun. The glare is blinding for a moment, and the bustling sounds of the living world rush back in. The mystery of those two men remains sealed in the darkness below, but the questions they raised follow you out into the open air. Their story, whatever it may have been, seems to have existed in a privileged bubble, a private statement made by men of high status. But what about everyone else? What was the code that governed the lives of ordinary men, far from the king's court and the luxury of a painted tomb? To understand that, you have to understand the Egyptian code of masculinity. It wasn't something that was written down in a single book of rules. It was a powerful, unspoken contract that every man was expected to sign the moment he was born. It was woven into their language, their art, and the very structure of their society. And at its core, it was all about control and action. A true man, or Ray-Met-J, in their language, was a master of his domain. First and foremost, he was the master of his own household. He was the provider and the protector. He was expected to marry father children, especially a son to inherit his property and ensure his funerary cult, and manage his family with a firm but just hand. The popular wisdom texts, collections of advice passed down from father to son, are full of instructions on this. They advise a man to take a wife when you are young, that she may make a son for you, and to fill her belly, clothe her back. That is how you show your love for her. It was a pragmatic, contractual view of marriage, centered on procreation and the creation of a stable, productive household. The man was the pillar, and the family was the structure built around him. This control extended beyond the home. A true man was also a master of his emotions. The ideal was a man who was silent, patient, and self-controlled. The GRMAA, the truly silent one. He didn't act rashly. He listened more than he spoke. He was thoughtful and deliberate. His opposite was the heated man, the one who was impulsive, loud, and quick to anger. This was seen as a sign of weakness, of being controlled by your passions rather than being in control of them. In a society as ordered as Mayat, emotional chaos was as dangerous as any other kind. And of course, a true man was active, not passive. You see this everywhere in their art. The men are depicted in motion, striding forward, hunting, fishing, overseeing work, fighting in battle. Their bodies are strong and athletic, their skin painted a robust reddish-brown to show they are people of action who work and live under the sun. Women, by contrast, are usually shown in more static poses, often standing still or sitting, their skin painted a lighter yellow ochre, indicating a more sheltered, domestic life. There are exceptions, of course, but this was the powerful, pervasive ideal. One of the more peculiar ways this code manifested was in their attitudes towards certain professions. While being a scribe was one of the most respected jobs, as it meant you were part of the tiny literate elite, some manual laborers were looked down upon not just for the hard work, but for what the work did to their bodies. A famous satirical text, The Satire of the Trades, viciously mocks various professions to convince a young boy that being a scribe is the only life worth living. It describes the potter as being smeared with soil, like one whose folk have died. The sandal maker is miserable, and the weaver is wretched, cooped up in his workshop, unable to breathe the air. The text implies that these jobs are demeaning, trapping a man and making him less than what he should be. The historians' debate here revolves around whether this was snobbish elite propaganda or a genuinely widespread social view. Ultimately, the code of masculinity was a performance. It was a role you played every day, in public and in private. You had to project an aura of control, potency, and quiet confidence. Your worth was measured by your ability to build a family, run a household, control your emotions, and act upon the world. It was a heavy burden, a constant pressure to live up to an all-know ability, and it created a terrifying vulnerability. Then anything that even hinted at passivity at being the one acted upon was not just an insult. It was a threat to your very identity as a man. You are walking through the crowded streets of the city once more. The sun is high, beating down on the dusty alleyways. You hear the rhythmic clang of a coppersmith's hammer, the sharp cries of a vendor selling figs, the low murmur of 100 conversations happening all at once. In this world of constant social interaction, reputation is everything. It is a currency more valuable than grain or gold. That reputation is built entirely on the foundation of the masculine code you've just begun to understand. Now, imagine that foundation cracking. Imagine the one thing that could bring it all crashing down. It wasn't failing in business. It wasn't being a proof armor. It wasn't even cowardice in battle, though that was certainly a disgrace. The ultimate social catastrophe, the one thing that could utterly erase a man's status and identity, was to be publicly perceived as having taken the passive, submissive role in a sexual encounter with another man. This was the unspeakable shame. It's crucial to understand that this wasn't about love or orientation in the way we think of it today. It was purely about the mechanics of power and the symbolism of the act. The man who was the active partner, the one who dominated, was not seen as having compromised his masculinity. In a strange and brutal way, he might even have been seen as having asserted it, just as Seth tried to do to Horus. His actions, while perhaps not praiseworthy, did not fundamentally challenge his identity as a true man. He was still in the dominant role. But for the man on the receiving end, the situation was catastrophic. He had allowed himself to be treated as a woman is treated. In the rigid gender hierarchy of ancient Egypt, this was a complete inversion of the natural order, a personal surrender to chaos. He had failed in the most fundamental duty of a man, to be in control, to be the active force. The shame was not in the act itself, but in the role he had taken within it. He was now perceived as weak, effeminate, and fundamentally untrustworthy. How could a man who could not even control his own body be trusted to control a household, command soldiers, or maintain his part of Mayet? This concept is vividly illustrated in a legal document from the Middle Kingdom, known as Papyrus Brooklyn 35.1 for 6. It's a dry administrative record of fugitives from a state labor institution. But one entry stands out. It describes a man named Ntf, a weaver, and gives the reason for his flight. He fled after he had been buggered by the General Sepe. The language is blunt and factual. What's fascinating is not just the record of the event, but the implication. Is not the one listed as a fugitive. It is Ntf, the victim, who has run away. Why? Because the public knowledge of his humiliation was so complete that he could no longer function in society. He had lost his honor, his social standing, and his identity as a man. His only option was to disappear. Even in the afterlife, this fear held immense power. In one of the magical spells from the coffin texts designed to protect the deceased on their journey through the underworld, the speaker emphatically declares, "My abomination is to be passive." The idea was so horrifying that a man needed a magical incantation to protect himself from it, even after death. He was pleading with the gods to ensure his masculine integrity remained intact for all eternity. Historians still debate the precise legal status of the passive role. Was it an actual crime that a court would prosecute, or was the social punishment so severe that the law was irrelevant? The lack of explicit laws against it suggests the latter. You didn't need a judge to sentence a man to ruin when public scorn and ridicule could do it far more effectively. The shame was a prison without walls, a punishment carried out not by the state, but by the community, a whisper, a pointed joke, a derogatory nickname. These were the weapons that enforced the code. And in a world without privacy, where everyone knew their neighbor's business, these weapons were devastatingly effective. This created a powerful conspiracy of silence. The victims, like in TF, would flee, and those who engaged in such acts by choice, if they existed, would have had to live a life of absolute secrecy, knowing that a single misstep, a single rumor, could lead to total social annihilation. You find yourself in a different setting now, away from the grand temples and the dusty streets. You are inside the cool, quiet workshop of a scribe. Bundles of papyrus scrolls are stacked neatly in niches in the wall. Pots of blackened red ink sit on a low wooden table, next to a palette holding thin reed brushes. A young boy is practicing his letters on a broken piece of pottery and Osirisnet, carefully copying the elegant, bird-like shapes his master has drawn. This is the nerve center of the Egyptian state, the place where the official story is written down. But it's also a place where a subtler, more coded language was understood. In a society where the ultimate shame was so potent, people didn't always need to speak about it directly. They developed a world of double meanings, of insults and accusations that were veiled, but perfectly understood by everyone. Language became a minefield, where a seemingly innocent word could be deployed with devastating precision. The most common and potent of these coded insults was the word hem. On the surface, hem could simply mean coward or weakling. You might see it in a military text describing a fleeing enemy, but it carried a much heavier, more specific connotation, one that pointed directly to effeminacy and, by extension, to sexual passivity. To call a man hem was not just to question his bravery, it was to question his very manhood. It was a loaded term, a verbal shorthand for the unspeakable shame. When a general in a text rallies his troops, he might shout, "Behave like men. Do not be hem." Everyone knew exactly what he meant. This coded language bled into their art and literature. There is a famous satirical story from the New Kingdom called The Tale of the Herdsman. In it, a simple herdsman discovers a beautiful goddess bathing in a remote lake. He is terrified, but also mesmerized. But he is master to describe what he has seen, but he is so overwhelmed that he can't speak properly. He stammers and becomes incoherent. The interesting part is how the story describes his state. It says his limbs became weak, and he was unable to control his own body. To an Egyptian audience, this was a comical depiction of a man losing his masculine self-control, becoming weak and passive in the face of overwhelming feminine power. It was a joke, but a joke that only works if you understand the underlying anxiety about losing control. Even architectural terms could be weaponized. The main entrance to a temple was a massive gateway called a pylon. But the same word, or one very similar, could be used in a derogatory way to refer to a man who was seen as effeminate. Historians are still puzzling over the exact connection. Is it because a gateway is something that is entered, something that is entered, something passive? Or is the linguistic similarity just a coincidence? But it shows how even the most solid and permanent parts of their world could be drawn into this web of insinuation. And then you have the graffiti. Away from the formal, perfect hieroglyphs of the monuments, ordinary people scribbled their own thoughts onto rocks, tomb walls, and pottery shards. And in this unofficial script of the common person, the insults were often much more direct. You might find a crude drawing of a man in a submissive posture, with a caption calling him by a derogatory name. These were the ancient equivalent to auditory name. These were the ancient equivalent of a bathroom stall insult, but they reveal the same underlying cultural obsession. So you begin to see that this wasn't just a single rule or it was an entire atmosphere, a pervasive system of control built on implication and coded language. It created a world where a man had to be constantly vigilant, not just about his reputation, a careless word, a gesture that was too soft, a friendship that was too intense. Any of these could be seized upon by a rival and used to hint at the ultimate shame. It meant that life was a performance, and the script was unwritten but known to all. And for anyone who couldn't or wouldn't follow that script, the only option was to become invisible, to live in a world of shadows and unspoken truths, hoping the spotlight of accusation would never find them. The scribe's workshop fades, and you are left in a quiet, contemplative space, a space of pure imagination. You have seen the rigid social code, you have heard the divine warnings, you have understood the devastating power of shame. The official world of ancient Egypt seems like a fortress, designed to keep out anything that threatens its perfect order. But no fortress is ever truly impenetrable. There are always cracks, hidden doorways, and secret passages. So now we must do what the historians and archaeologists must do when the evidence runs out. We must use a careful, informed imagination to try and picture what is missing. We must try to imagine an invisible life. If the shame of passivity was so absolute, and the code of masculinity so rigid, does that mean that men who desired other men, or men who engaged in sex work, simply didn't exist? That seems unlikely. Human nature is rarely so neat and tidy. It's far more probable that they did exist, but that their lives were lived so far in the shadows that they left almost no trace in the historical record. Let's start by imagining a place. Where would these forbidden encounters happen? Certainly not in the open courtyard of a family home. Not in the sacred precincts of a temple. It would have to be in the liminal spaces of the city, the places that were neither fully public nor fully private. Perhaps in the crowded, anonymous back alleys of the workers' village at Deir el-Medina, where the tomb builders lived, or in the rowdy taverns and beer houses along the docks of Thebes, where foreign sailors and merchants mingled with locals, far from the watchful eyes of their families. These were places of transaction of flux, where the normal rules of society were temporarily relaxed. Imagine the language they would use. It couldn't be direct. It would have to be a language of glances, of subtle gestures, of coded phrases. A certain way of adjusting a kilt, a particular word offered to a stranger at a market stall. A whole secret vocabulary of invitation and consent that would be invisible to the uninitiated. This is a part of history we can never recover, the fleeting, ephemeral language of the marginalized. Now, think about the men themselves. Who were they? It's easy to fall into stereotypes, but the reality was likely complex. There would not have been a single monolithic group. There would have been men who, out of desire, sought out these encounters despite the risks. Perhaps they were married soldiers, far from home. Perhaps they were even wealthy officials, like those satirized by the scribes, who could use their power and money to create a zone of privacy and safety around themselves. And then there were those who were not there by choice. The men who sold their bodies not out of desire, but out of desperation. This is the other side of the invisible world, the one driven by poverty and survival. Imagine a young man from a poor family, facing starvation during a bad harvest, or a man who has fallen into debt and has no other way to pay it off. For him, the risk of social ruin might be outweighed by the immediate, crushing need to eat, or to provide for his family. His story is not one of liberation or identity, but one of grim necessity. This is a difficult and uncomfortable reality to consider, but it is a necessary part of the picture. The academic community is deeply divided on how to even approach this topic, as the lack of direct evidence makes every statement a form of speculation. But to ignore the possibility is to sanitize the past, to pretend that desperation and exploitation did not exist alongside the golden pharaohs and the serene gods. Imagining this invisible life is a sobering exercise. It forces us to confront the immense gaps in our knowledge. The grand monuments tell us what the Egyptians wanted to remember about themselves. But the silence tells us what they chose to forget, or what they were forced to hide. The lives of these men were lived in that silence. They were written in water, not in stone. And so to listen to the silence itself, and to imagine the human stories that it might contain. Let's continue the work of careful imagination, stepping deeper into the shadows you've just begun to perceive. You are no longer in the comfortable villa or the orderly scribe's workshop. You are somewhere else entirely. Perhaps it's a military garrison on the empire's frontier, or a vast quarry where the air is thick with limestone dust and the rhythmic thud of mallets. These are the places where the engine of the Egyptian state did its heaviest work, often powered by the bodies of those who had no choice. So who were these men, the ones who might have formed this invisible class? The evidence suggests they likely came from two main groups, the foreigner and the desperate. First, the foreigner. To the ancient Egyptians, the world was simple. There was Kemet, the Black Land, their home, the center of order and civilization. And then there was everything else, the Khnumhotep, the foreign lands, which were seen as places of chaos and inferiority. People from these lands were often viewed with suspicion and disdain. You see this clearly in their art. Temple walls are covered with scenes of the pharaoh triumphantly grabbing a handful of foreign enemies by the hair, ready to smite them. Foreigners are depicted with exaggerated, often cartoonish features. The dark, sun-beaten skin and broad features of Nubians from the south, the pointed beards and distinct clothing of Asiatics from the Levant. When Egypt's armies were victorious, they brought back not just golden cattle but people, prisoners of war. These captives were no longer seen as men, not in the Egyptian sense. They were stripped of their names, their families, their identities. They became property of the state or the temples, a convenient source of labor. You can imagine them here in this quarry, their bodies marked by the sun and the hard work. Some might have even borne tattoos or brands marking them as the property of a certain institution. Historians are still engaged in a long and complex debate about the exact nature of slavery in ancient Egypt. It wasn't quite the chattel slavery of ancient Rome. There is evidence that some servants could own property or even earn their freedom. But for a prisoner of war in a state-run mine, life was likely brutal and short. For these men, the code of Egyptian masculinity meant nothing. It was not their code, and more importantly, their Egyptian masters did not see them as being protected by it. They were outside the social contract. This made them incredibly vulnerable. A powerful official, a soldier, or a foreman could exploit them with impunity. There would be no social shame for the client because the act was being perpetrated on another, unarmed person. And for the captive, there was no recourse, no court of appeal. Refusal could mean a beating or worse. For them, it was not a transaction, it was just another form of their subjugation. Then you have the second group, the desperate. These were not foreigners. They were Egyptians. Men who, through misfortune, had fallen through the cracks of Ma'at's perfect order. Imagine a farmer whose crops failed for 2 seasons in a row, whose children are crying from hunger. Or a craftsman who has fallen into a debt he can never repay, with the threat of being sold into servitude hanging over his family. For a man in this position, the choices are grim. He could watch his family starve, or he could sell the only thing he has left, his own body. This is a far more tragic figure. He understands the social code perfectly. He knows the unspeakable shame associated with the passive role. But the immediate, visceral reality of starvation is more horrifying still. So under the cover of darkness, he might slip into one of those back alley taverns you imagined, his face hidden in the shadows, praying no one recognizes him. He is making a terrible bargain, sacrificing his social identity, his very manhood, for the handful of copper deben or the loaf of bread that will keep his family alive for one more day. His story is one of ultimate powerlessness, a tragic collision between the rigid ideals of his culture and the brutal realities of survival. For him, this invisible life is a tightrope walk over a canyon of shame, and he walks it every single night. Your perspective shifts now. You are no longer in the dusty quarry or the desperate back alleys. You are leaving the world of the provider and entering the world of the client. The air grows cooler, cleaner. The scent of mud and sweat is replaced by the faint perfume of lotus and myrrh. You are inside the high walls of a private villa, the home of a powerful man. He could be a high priest, a military general, a royal scribe, a man who is a pillar of the community, a living embodiment of Mayat. By day, he is the perfect Egyptian man. He oversees his estates with a firm hand. He dictates letters that will become part of the official record. In public, he is seen with his wife, the mistress of the house, and his well-behaved children. He presents a flawless facade of order and control. His reputation is immaculate. He is the Gurmaa, the truly silent one, his emotions in check, his masculinity unquestionable. But now it is night. The family is asleep. The servants have been dismissed. The villa is quiet. And in this privacy, bought and paid for by his immense wealth and power, another side of his life is allowed to surface. The desires that must be suppressed in the bright light of day can be indulged under bright lighters. Who were these clients in high places? It's a question that, by its very nature, is almost impossible to answer with hard evidence. A man like this would have done everything in his power to ensure that this part of his life left no trace, no record, no whisper that could tarnish his public image. And yet we have clues. Remember the satire of the trades, that snarky piece of propaganda promoting the life of a scribe. It contains lines that mock other professions with surprising specificity. When criticizing the laundryman, The text doesn't just talk about the hard work. It says he cleans the clothes of a menstruating woman, a task seen as ritually impure. It hints at a life spent dealing with the secret, unclean aspects of society. Some scholars have suggested that the viciousness of these satires, which often accuse men of being weak or effeminate, might be a reflection of the anxieties of the elite themselves. It's a classic case of protesting too much. By loudly mocking any hint of unmanliness in others, they reinforce their own fragile hold on the masculine ideal. Then there is the simple logic of power. In any society with a rigid hierarchy and a deeply repressed aspect of human nature, it is almost always the powerful who are able to break the rules with the fewest consequences. A wealthy official had resources that a common man could only dream of. He had private spaces. He had trusted servants who could act as intermediaries, arranging encounters with a discretion that money could buy. He could afford to pay for silence. He might have had access to foreign slaves or servants within his own household who were in no position to refuse his advances or report them to anyone. A curious piece of evidence comes from a collection of magical spells. One spell is designed to cause a man to fall in love with another man. The spell is written from the perspective of the active, dominant partner, and it is a spell of magical coercion. It is not about mutual affection, but about using supernatural means to bend another man to his will. The very existence of such a spell, while not proof that it was widely practiced, proves that the idea was at least conceivable, and who had access to these magical texts? The literate elite, the priests and the scribes. The academic debate rages on whether these spells were for actual use, or were simply part of a comprehensive library of all possibilities, a way of understanding and controlling the forces of the universe, including the chaotic force of illicit desire. So you can imagine this powerful man, this pillar of society sitting alone in his lamplit chamber. He is a man who has everything. Wealth, status, a family. But he is also a prisoner of the very system that gives him his power. He is trapped by the relentless demand to be the perfect Egyptian man. And perhaps in the secret corners of the night, he seeks out an experience that allows him to step outside of that role, to engage with a world of forbidden desires that his public self would deny with its last breath. His story is not one of poverty, but of a different kind of desperation. The desperation to feel something that his perfectly ordered world will not allow. The scene solidifies. You are a silent observer in a dimly lit room, deep within that wealthy official's villa. The only light comes from a single, flickering oil lamp, casting long, wavering shadows that make the space feel secretive and unreal. The air is thick with the scent of cheap wine, a stark contrast to the refined perfumes of the house. This is a back room, a storage chamber, a place no honored guest would ever see. This is where the transaction happens. Imagine the two figures in the room. One is the official, the client. He has changed out of his fine, pleated linen robes. He is wearing a simple kilt, an attempt to bridge the vast social chasm between them, or perhaps just to be more comfortable. He is not the composed, authoritative man you saw in public. Here, in the shadows, his face is a mask of something else. Nervousness, excitement, perhaps even a flicker of self-loathing. He is a tourist in this forbidden world, and he knows he doesn't belong. The other figure is the provider. He might be one of those desperate men you pictured earlier, or a foreign slave brought here by a trusted servant. He is likely younger, thinner. His eyes are watchful, constantly assessing the situation. He is not here for pleasure or for passion. He is here to work. His mind is a ledger of risk and reward. How much will he be paid? Is it safe? Will this powerful man protect him, or will he be discarded and exposed if something goes wrong? His very survival depends on his ability to read the subtle cues, to perform the role that is expected of him without losing himself completely. The exchange begins not with words, but with objects. The official places a small linen pouch on a wooden stool. The sound it makes is a soft clink, not the clear ring of silver or gold, but the dull thud of copper debin, or perhaps a few small silver rings. This is the payment. It might also include a jug of wine or a loaf of fine bread. Luxuries that would be a feast for the provider's family. This is the heart of the matter, the thing that makes this encounter possible and defines its nature. It is a commercial transaction, an exchange of power for services, of wealth for the temporary suspension of social rules. There is a whole unspoken script to this moment. The provider does not immediately grab the pouch. That would be too eager to transactional. He waits. The official might make a gesture, a nod indicating that the payment is his. The gestures are everything. They look, a tilt of the head, a hand placed on a shoulder. This is the language of a world that cannot be spoken about. They are creating a temporary, fragile reality in this back room. A reality governed by a set of unwritten rules that both of them understand. One of the fascinating undebated aspects of this world is the role of age. In many other ancient cultures, relationships between an older, powerful man and a younger, lower status male were recognized, if not always approved, social institution. In Egypt, the evidence is so scarce that we can only speculate. But it's logical to assume that a power imbalance, often expressed through an age difference, would have been a common feature of these encounters. The older man has the wealth, the experience, the power. The younger man has his youth, his body. It is a classic, if unsettling, dynamic. As you watch this silent, tense ballet unfold, you are struck by the immense risk hanging in the air. For the official, the risk is social ruin. A disgruntled servant, a neighbor who saw too much, a provider who gets caught and maims his clients. Any of these could bring his perfectly constructed world crashing down. For the provider, the risks are even greater. He risks not only the unspeakable shame, but also violence. A client who is unhappy, or one who is overcome with guilt and self-hatred after the fact, could easily turn on him. Who would a magistrate believe? The word of a man from the margins of society, already engaged in a shameful act. It's no choice at all. And so he plays his part, a careful performance of submission and availability, his mind always on the exit, on the moment he can take his payment and melt back into the anonymity of the night. The transaction is complete. The pouch of copper rings has been taken. The provider slips out of a back gate, melting into the labyrinthine alleys of the sleeping city. You follow him, not the wealthy official. You follow the risk. He pulls his rough woolen cloak tighter around himself, not just against the night's chill, but as if to make himself smaller, more invisible. His footsteps are quick and silent on the hard-packed earth. Every distant dog bark sounds like an alarm. He is not heading home yet. To return to his family's small, one-room house with a sudden influx of food or money would raise questions. Suspicion is a luxury his family cannot afford. So he first goes to a pre-arranged place, perhaps a loose brick in an old wall or a designated spot by the riverbank, to hide the bulk of his payment. He keeps only what he can plausibly explain. Perhaps he'll say he found a few hours of work unloading a boat at the dock. The lie must be as carefully constructed as the rest of his secret knife. You watch him as he finally makes his way home. He slips through the simple doorway of a mud brick house in the poorest quarter of the city. Inside, his family is asleep on reed mats on the floor. In the faint moonlight filtering through a small window, you can see the thinness of their blankets, the worried lines on his wife's sleeping face. He quietly adds a small loaf of bread he has saved to their meager pantry. This is it. This is the reason. Silent act is the justification for the monumental risk he has just taken. This is the price of survival. Let's consider that price in concrete terms. What was a handful of copper debon actually worth? It's always tricky to make direct comparisons, but we have some idea from surviving records. A basic loaf of bread might cost half a debon. A month's wages for a common laborer might be around 200 debon. So the payment he received for one night's dangerous work might have been enough to buy bread for his family for a few days, maybe a week if he was lucky. It was not enough to get rich. It was not enough to escape his life. It was just enough to keep going. This economic reality adds another layer of tragedy to his situation. He is trapped in a cycle. The money he earns is just enough to survive, but not enough to change his circumstances, forcing him back into the same dangerous transaction again and again. His body has become a resource, one that he is mining to keep his family alive, and just like a real mine, the resource is finite and the work is perilous. There's a curious parallel we can find in the official state records, though it's a world away from this secret life. Sometimes, The government would pay its workers not in currency, but in rations of bread and beer. A famous set of documents from the village of the tomb builders Deir el-Medina shows that the workers once went on strike. The first recorded labor strike in history. Why? Because their government rations were late. Their complaint, recorded by a scribe, was simple. This shows how precarious life was, even for skilled, state-employed craftsmen. For someone at the very bottom of the economic ladder, with no state support, the threat of hunger was a constant, terrifying companion. Historians continue to debate the frequency and severity of famine in ancient Egypt. While the Nile was generally reliable, even small variations could lead to widespread hardship, creating the very desperation that would feed this hidden economy. So as you watch this man finally lie down on his mat, the weight of his secret settling upon him, you understand the full scope of his gamble. He has wagered his social identity, his honor, his place in the world of Mayat, all for a few days' worth of bread. He has walked into the darkest shadows of his society, embraced the unspeakable shame, and for what? For the simple, desperate, and profoundly human act of feeding his family. He closes his eyes, but sleep will not come easily. The risk is a ghost that will haunt his every waking moment and every restless night. Let's return just for a moment to that dimly lit back room in the villa. The provider has gone, but the ghost of the transaction lingers in the air. The wealthy official is alone now with his actions, and you are there to observe the complex aftermath. He might feel a sense of relief, of a tension released. He might feel a pang of guilt, a flicker of the shame he has so carefully outsourced onto another man. Or he might feel nothing at all, just a detached sense of a need being met. It's tempting to see this encounter as a simple one-way street. The powerful client exploiting the powerless provider. And in many ways, that is the stark reality. The official holds all the cards, the wealth, the social standing, the physical security. He sets the terms. He controls the space. He is, in the eyes of the world, untouchable. But the power dynamics at play might be more subtle and more tangled than they first appear. For the client, this secret encounter is an act of rebellion, albeit a very safe and private one. He is rebelling against the crushing weight of his own public persona. The constant pressure to be the perfect husband, the perfect pillar of society, is immense. In this hidden space, for a brief time, he can shed that skin. He can explore a side of himself that is forbidden, chaotic, and contrary to Mayat. In a strange paradox, by engaging in an act of pure dominance over another man, he is also, in a way, surrendering to his own unmanly desires. He is briefly stepping into the world of Seth, the world of chaos, in order to feel something his ordered world of Horus denies him. For the provider, the situation is far more perilous, but it is not entirely without a strange, distorted form of power. In that room, he is the object of a powerful man's obsessive need. He is the keeper of a secret that could ruin this man. This is a dangerous and fragile kind of power, but it is power nonetheless. He learns to be a keen observer of human nature, a psychologist of the shadows. He must know how to please, how to be what the client needs him to be, all while protecting himself. He might learn to feign pleasure, to perform a role that makes the client feel safe and in control, which in turn keeps him safe. There's a fascinating piece of literature from the Middle Kingdom called The Tale of the Eloquent Peasant. In it, a poor peasant is robbed by a corrupt official. Instead of giving up, the peasant goes to the high steward and delivers a series of 9 beautiful, eloquent, and poetic speeches demanding justice. The speeches are so brilliant that the pharaoh himself hears of them, intrigued, orders the steward to keep rejecting the peasant's pleas, and to provide him with food and secretly record his speeches, just to see what he'll say next. In the end, the peasant gets his justice. The story is a celebration of the power of a common man's voice against corrupt authority. While it's not about sexuality, it speaks to a core Egyptian belief that even the lowliest person, if they are clever and righteous, can challenge the powerful. The provider in our story is no eloquent peasant, but he shares that need to navigate a world of corrupt power, using his wits as his only shield. The question of consent in these situations is a deeply problematic one. and one that modern historians grapple with constantly. Can a person in a state of utter desperation truly consent? Is it a choice when the alternative is starvation? This is a moral and philosophical question that the ancient Egyptians themselves may not have even asked in the way we do. Their world was built on hierarchy and obligation, but from our vantage point, we can see their deeper ambiguity. The provider may agree to the transaction, but he is acting under a form of duress so extreme that it calls the very idea of free will into question. So the room is not just a space of physical transaction. It is a psychological theater where complex dramas of power, shame, desire, and survival are played out. The client gets to explore his forbidden self in a controlled environment. The provider, in the most precarious way imaginable, gets to leverage a powerful man's secret for his own survival. It is a toxic, deeply unequal relationship, but it is a relationship nonetheless. And it is held together by a single, powerful thread, the shared secret that binds them both to the shadows. The night's secret encounter is over. The provider has vanished back into the city's poorest quarters, and the high official has returned to the main part of his villa, resuming his role as master of the house. The fragile, temporary world they created in that back room has dissolved. Now, a new and equally powerful force takes over. You might be wondering, if an official was caught in such a compromising position, what would actually happen? Would he be arrested, thrown in prison? We have remarkably few records of anything like that happening. Our modern idea of law is a set of written codes, enforced by police and adjudicated in courts. Ancient Egyptian laws, certainly. We have records of property disputes, theft trials, and even murder investigations. But when it came to matters of social taboo and sexual morality, the enforcement mechanism seems to have been very different. There was no dedicated vice squad patrolling the back alleys of Thebes. The state, for the most part, seemed to have a hands-off approach to what went on behind closed doors. Their concern was with public order, with the smooth functioning of the great cosmic and bureaucratic machine. As long as you paid your taxes, performed your duties, and maintained a public appearance of respecting merit, the state was likely to leave you alone. This practicality is a hallmark of their civilization. The real enforcement came from society itself. The punishment was not imprisonment but social ruin. For the client, the man of high status, an accusation alone could be devastating. It wouldn't necessarily need to be proven in a court of law. A well-placed rumor, a satirical poem passed around among his fellow scribes, a piece of graffiti on a public wall. That's all it would take. His rivals would seize upon it. He would be undermined. He might be passed over for a promotion. His carefully curated image as a true man, a silent and controlled leader, would be shattered. He would be seen as a man ruled by chaotic passions, a man who indulged in shameful, unmanly acts. The shame would cling to him like dust, and he might never be able to wash it off. For the provider, the consequences of being discovered were even more direct and catastrophic, as you've already seen with the story of NTF, the weaver who fled. He would be branded, not by the state, but by his community. He would be the subject of open ridicule. The word him would follow him down the street. Other men might refuse to work with him. He could be ostracized, cast out of the social fabric of his village or neighborhood. In a world where community and family were the only safety net, to be cast out was a death sentence of a different kind. This reliance on social pressure rather than legal code is a subject of much discussion among Egyptologists. Some argue it shows a surprisingly tolerant and pragmatic society, one that understood the difference between a private failing and a public crime. Others argue the opposite, that the social control was so absolute and so terrifyingly effective that formal laws were simply unnecessary. Why write a law against something when public humiliation and social annihilation are a far more powerful deterrent? A curious piece of evidence for this comes from their funerary texts. Remember the negative confession where the deceased stands before the gods and lists all the bad things they haven't done. It's a long list. I have not been greedy. But what's fascinating is what's missing. In most versions of this text, there is no specific confession that says, "I have not had relations with another man." The focus is on social crimes, theft, lying, causing harm to others. This seems to support the idea that the act itself was not considered a great sin against the gods, on par with murder or theft. The sin was against the social order, against your reputation as a man. It was a crime against Ma'at, certainly, but it was punished on earth, by your peers, not necessarily in the afterlife by the gods. So the silence is not an absence of law, it is the law. It is a powerful, suffocating force that keeps the entire hidden world in check. It binds the client and the provider together in a pact of mutual self-preservation. Both of them have everything to lose if the secret gets out. This shared threat is the invisible wall that surrounds their encounters. The reason this part of Egyptian life has remained so deeply buried for so long. It was a system designed to erase itself. You've explored the grand tombs, the public temples, and the private villas. You've seen the official story, written in perfect, eternal hieroglyphs. But that is not where you will find the truth of this hidden world. To find a trace of that, you must look at the things that were meant to be thrown away. You have to sift through the garbage of the past. You find yourself not in a grand library, but in a dusty storeroom, the kind of place an archaeologist dreams of. You are surrounded by piles of broken pottery. These are ostraca, the scrap paper of ancient Egypt. Papyrus was expensive, reserved for important documents. For everything else, for practicing letters, for jotting down a laundry list, for sending a quick note, for doodling, people used what was abundant and free. Shards of broken pottery, or flakes of limestone, discarded objects. You can sometimes find a glimpse of a reality that was never meant to be preserved. You pick up one shard. It's a note from a foreman to one of his workers. It's mundane, a simple work order. But then you pick up another. This one is different. The lines are crude, not the work of a master artist, but of an ordinary person, a bit of black ink. The drawing depicts two men in a posture that is unmistakably intimate. It's not the romantic, idealized embrace of Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep. This is something rougher, more explicit. It's a piece of ancient graffiti, a joke, an insult, a boast. It's impossible to know for sure. But it is a crack in the wall of silence, a tiny piece of evidence that these things were on people's minds. You find another shard. This one has writing on it. It's a fragment of a story or a poem. The language is difficult, full of slang and colloquy in a formal religious text. The fragment seems to describe an encounter in a tavern. It mentions a boy with eyes like a gazelle and a soldier with a heavy purse. The rest of the text is lost, broken off centuries ago. Was it all a story? A cautionary tale? A simple piece of erotic fiction? But it's a tantalizing whisper from the world of the taverns and the back alleys. Even medical text can offer strange clues. You might find a papyrus that lists remedies for various ailments. Among the cures for headaches and stomach pains, you might find a magical inscription that refers obliquely to problems between a man and a man. The language is always veiled, using euphemisms that are hard for modern scholars to decipher. For example, a text might refer to treating a man who takes the place of a woman. The debate among historians is fierce. Are these texts evidence of a medical understanding of same-sex relationships? Or are they simply magical curses designed to inflict the ultimate shame? Ephemenius, upon an enemy. The ambiguity is maddening, but the mere mention of such a topic is in itself significant. And then there are the legal scraps. You find a record of a court case. It's not about a sexual crime. It's a dispute over a stolen donkey. But during the testimony, one witness in a fit of anger tries to discredit the other. The scribe has recorded his outburst. And furthermore, everyone in the village knows he is the one who. And here, a derogatory term, a slang word for the passive partner. The judge in the text seems to have ignored the outburst and focused on the donkey. But the fact that the scribe wrote it down tells you something. It tells you that this kind of accusation was a common weapon in everyday disputes. It was the ultimate way to slander an opponent. Each of these fragments, the crude drawing, the broken poem, the veiled medical text, the angry insult, is on its own almost nothing. It's a single word on a pottery shard, a whisper in a sea of official silence. But when you gather them all together, the faint picture begins to emerge. It's like trying to assemble a mosaic when you only have a handful of tiles. You can't see the whole image, but you could begin to make out a shape, a color, a pattern. The words that were never meant to survive. And they tell you that beneath the smooth, perfect surface of Egyptian society, there was another story, one that was messy human, and far more complex than the hieroglyphs on the temple walls would ever have you believe. You are back in the scribe's school, the Atsiba. But this time it's after hours. The young apprentices have gone home, and a few senior scribes are gathered together, their work for the day done. The atmosphere is relaxed, informal. A jug of beer is being passed around. This is not the place for writing sacred hymns or recording tax revenues. This is a place for gossip, for jokes, and for a very particular kind of literature. The Egyptian scribes, being the tiny literate elite, had a highly developed sense of their own importance, and they loved to write texts that proved how clever they were. One of their favorite genres was the satirical takedown, a witty and often vicious piece of writing that mocked a particular person or group. And in these satirical texts, hidden beneath layers of clever wordplay and literary allusions, you can sometimes find the most pointed accusations of all. The veil is lifted just a little. One such text that has survived is a fragmentary Papiers from the New Kingdom, now known as Papiers Anastasiae. It's a long, elaborate letter written by one scribe, Hori, to another, Amenemop. On the surface, it's a literary knowledge, taunting Amenemop for his supposed ignorance. He quizzes him on the geography of Syria-Palestine, on the logistics of building a ramp, on the proper way to calculate rations for an army. You are the clever scribe, his tone dripping with sarcasm. So tell me this. But woven into this intellectual sparring are personal insults that are far more insidious. Hori doesn't just call Amenemop stupid. He attacks his very competence as a man. He describes him as a weakened, ineffectual leader, one who can't control his men or manage a project. He paints a picture of Amenemop as someone who is fundamentally passive, a man who is overwhelmed by his duties. The reins are too heavy for you, he sneers, to an ancient Egyptian reader. This constant chipping away at a man's professional competence would have been understood as an attack on his masculine identity. And then, Hori goes further. He uses language that, while not explicit, is highly suggestive. He describes Amenemop in ways that echo the stereotypes of the effeminate man. He calls him delicate, easily flustered, and ill-suited to the tough, active life of a true official. While the text never makes a direct sexual accusation, the cumulative effect is a kind of character assassination by 1,000 cuts. Hori is using the coded language of shame you've already learned about, but he's doing it with the skill of a master propagandist. He is trying to make Amenemop a laughingstock among their peers, to brand him as a hem, a weakling, without ever having to say the word. The existence of texts like this is a subject of ongoing academic fascination. Were these just personal squabbles between rival bureaucrats, or were they a recognized literary genre, a kind of ancient roast where the insults were understood to be part of the game? It's likely a bit of both, but what it reveals is a culture where this particular kind of insult, the questioning of a man's masculinity, was considered the ultimate rhetorical weapon. It was the ace up the sleeve in any argument. You can almost picture the scene. The scribes gathered in their lamplit room, reading Hori's latest witty diatribe aloud. There would be knowing chuckles, appreciative nods at a particularly clever turn of phrase. The unfortunate Amenemop might not even be there, but his reputation would be slowly, carefully dismantled by the laughter of his colleagues. It's a far more sophisticated form of social control than a crude piece of graffiti, but it is, in many ways, far more cruel. It's a reminder that in this world, the sharpest weapon was not a bronze sword, but a well-aimed word, and for the literate elite, satire was the art of turning those words into deadly projectiles, capable of destroying a man's career and his social standing with a single, perfectly crafted insult. The flickering lamplight of the scribe's school dims, and you find yourself in a different kind of light altogether. It's the harsh, hazy sunshine of the late 19th century. The air is no longer filled with the scent of lotus and Nile mud, but with coal smoke in the dust of excavation. You are at Sakava again, But it's a different Sakova. Gangs of local workmen, overseen by European gentlemen in pith helmets and starched collars, are clearing sand from the ancient tombs. This is the great age of Egyptology, a time of incredible discovery, but also a time of profound cultural bias. You are watching these early archaeologists, men from Victorian England, Imperial France, and Wilhelmine Germany, as they uncover the very tombs and texts you have been exploring. They are brilliant, dedicated scholars, and their work will lay the foundation for everything we know about ancient Egypt. But they carry their own world with them. They are products of a society that is, in many ways, even more rigid and repressive about sexuality than ancient Egypt ever was, and they are looking at the past through this very particular, very powerful Victorian lens. Imagine the moment in 1964 when the archaeologists first broke through the sealed entrance of the tomb of Niankhkhnum. They would have been thrilled. A perfectly preserved old kingdom too, untouched for over 4,000 years. They would have carefully documented the pottery, the inscriptions, the funerary goods. But then, they would have entered the main offering chapel and seen that central, astonishing image. The two men in their intimate, nose-to-nose embrace. How would they have processed that? To a man steeped in the strict moral codes of the mid-20th century, the idea of a romantic relationship between two men was deeply taboo, something unspeakable, as they might have called it. So, their minds would have immediately sought out a different explanation, a safer one that would not upset their own cultural norms. Ah, they must be brothers, they would conclude. Perhaps twins. What a remarkable yet respectable display of brotherly affection. This interpretation wasn't necessarily a deliberate act of deception. It was a form of cultural self-protection. It was easier, more comfortable, to see the past as a reflection of their own values. The possibility that these two ancient men could have been a couple was, for many of these early scholars, literally unthinkable. You see this pattern repeated again and again. When they found the satirical texts, like Papiers on Ostosiai, they would have read them as straightforward evidence of bureaucratic rivalries, focusing on the arguments about geography and logistics. They might have noted the insults as examples of ancient rudeness, but they would have likely missed the deeper, coded subtext about masculinity and shame. That entire layer of meaning would have been invisible to them, because it was not part of their own cultural vocabulary, even when confronted with more explicit evidence, like the crude graffiti on an ostracan. They often simply chose to ignore it. In the archives of many great museums, you can find the original field notes of these early excavators. You might read a meticulous description of a pottery shard, its dimensions, the type of clay, the style of the inscription. And then, at the end of the entry, a brief, dismissive note also contains a crude and obscene drawing of no historical value. The object would then be put in a box, sent to a museum storeroom, and forgotten for 100 years. It was not considered history. History was about kings and queens, wars and temples. It was not about the messy, complicated, and often sexual lives of ordinary people. This is a crucial and often overlooked part of our story. Our understanding of the past is not a pure, direct transmission of facts. It is a story that has been told and retold by generations of storytellers, each with their own biases and blind spots. For a very long time, the story of ancient Egypt was seen through this Victorian lens, which filtered out anything that was uncomfortable or didn't fit its own model of a civilized society. Historians still grapple with the legacy of these early interpretations. They must constantly ask themselves, are we seeing what was really there, or are we just seeing the faint outline of a Victorian gentleman's shadow cast over the evidence? It's a sobering reminder that the act of uncovering the past is also an act of interpretation. And sometimes, the hardest thing to excavate is our own preconceived notions. The image of the Victorian archaeologist with his pith helmet fades, and you are left in a quiet, modern space. It could be a university library late at night. The only sound is the gentle hum of the lights and the soft rustle of turning pages. You are surrounded by the work of a new generation of scholars, the men and women who are re-examining the evidence, looking at the old discoveries with fresh eyes. And as you sit here, you begin to understand the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. Why has this part of Egyptian history remained buried for so long? The first reason was a filter of past scholarship. For over a century, the evidence was either ignored, misinterpreted, or deliberately filed away as obscene and unimportant. The story was shaped by the moral codes of the 19th and early 20th centuries, and a comfortable, sanitized version of ancient Egypt was presented to the world. The embrace of Niankhkhnum was brotherly affection. The insults in the papyrus were just bureaucratic squabbling. The graffiti was meaningless vulgarity. This powerful, established narrative became the accepted truth, and it took a long time and a lot of courage for new scholars to begin questioning it. The second reason is the nature of the evidence itself. As you've seen, it is incredibly fragmented and ambiguous. There is no single papyrus that clearly lays out the rules of male sexuality. There is no monument celebrating a same-sex relationship. All we have are whispers and shadows. A controversial pose in a tomb, a coded insult in a letter, a crude drawing on a pottery shard, a veiled reference in medical text. Each piece of evidence on its own. The tomb shows brothers. The letter is just a joke. The drawing is an anomaly. The medical text is about a curse. To see the larger picture, you have to be willing to connect these scattered dots, to build a case from circumstantial evidence. This is difficult, painstaking work, and the conclusions are always open to debate, which makes many historians, who prefer to work with concrete certainties, very cautious. And that leads to the third, and perhaps most powerful, reason for the long silence. The subject matter is still taboo. The idea of male prostitution or same-sex relationships in ancient Egypt challenges deeply cherished notions about this foundational civilization. Egypt is often presented as a place of serene, monolithic order, of pharaohs, pyramids and gods. Introducing these complex, messy, and very human realities can be seen as tarnishing that image. Even today, in modern Egypt, the subject is incredibly sensitive, and foreign scholars working in the country are often very careful about the topics they choose to research and publicize. There is a fascinating ongoing debate in the academic community right now, which is often referred to as the minimalist versus maximalist debate. The minimalists argue that we should be extremely cautious. Given the scarcity of direct evidence, they say we can't make any grand claims. We should stick to what the texts explicitly say, and not read too much into ambiguous images or veiled insults. The maximalists, on the other hand, argue that to ignore the subtext and the circumstantial evidence is to be naive. They believe that if you understand the cultural context, the obsession with masculinity, the power of shame, the use of coded language, then the scattered pieces of evidence start to form a coherent, if incomplete, picture. Uncovering a buried truth is not just about finding new things, it's about finding new ways to see the things we've had all along. So the truth of this hidden world was not just buried once, under the sands of Sakava. It was buried a second time by the biases of early archaeologists. And it remains buried today under the weight of modern taboos and the sheer difficulty of interpreting a history that was never meant to be read. It's a story that has been triply erased. And that is why the work of piecing it back together is so difficult, so controversial, and so incredibly important. Patient active listening for the faintest whispers in a library of official silence. The library fades. The books dissolve into dust motes dancing in a single shaft of moonlight. You are back where you began, on the banks of the Nile. The river flows on, silent and indifferent, just as it has for millennia. It has carried the secrets of pharaohs and farmers, of priests and outcasts, and it has given up only a few of them. The great monuments still stand, proud and solid against the night sky, telling their official story of order and eternity, but you know now that this is not the only story. You have journeyed deep into the shadows of this golden civilization. You have tried to piece together a history that was actively suppressed by the people who lived it, ignored by the people who first discovered it, and is still debated by the people who study it today. And after all this, what can we say for certain? The honest answer is, not much. And that, in itself, is the most important lesson. We cannot say for certain that Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep were lovers. We can only say that they chose to represent their bond in a way that was unique and deeply intimate, borrowing the visual language of marriage from our home. The echoes of their controversial choice remain, but the truth of their hearts is lost to time. We cannot say for certain that there was a thriving, organized subculture of male sex workers in Thebes or Memphis. We can only say that the social and economic conditions for it existed, a rigid code of masculinity that created a demand for secret outlets, and a level of poverty and desperation that could create a supply. The faint traces on pottery, shards and in satirical texts are the echoes of that likely reality. We can never know the name of the man who slipped out of the official's villa with a pouch of copper rings. We can never know if he managed to feed his family, or if his secret was ever discovered. His life, and the lives of countless men like him, were lived in the margins, and the margins of history are the first things to crumble away. This is the great challenge of studying a history that was meant to be erased. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The silence that surrounds this topic in the official record is not proof that nothing was happening. On the contrary, in a society so obsessed with reputation and shame, the silence can be a form of evidence in itself. It is the sound of a door being firmly shut, of a curtain being drawn, of a society collectively deciding that some things are not to be spoken of. Historians must perpetually wrestle with this problem. There is a fierce, ongoing argument about the ethics of imaginative reconstruction. How far can we go in trying to fill in the gaps? When does informed speculation become historical fiction? There is no easy answer. Some scholars insist on sticking only to the hard, textual evidence, which results in a history that is safe but potentially incomplete. Others argue that it is a historian's duty to try and imagine the lives of the voiceless, the marginalized, the forgotten, even if it means taking risks with interpretation. They believe that a history that only recounts the lives of kings and scribes is not really history at all. So as you stand by the dark, flowing water, you are left with a profound sense of humility. You are left with a mosaic with most of its pieces missing. The picture is incomplete, and it will likely always be incomplete. But the few tiles we do have are luminous. They hint at a world far more complex, more human, and more troubled than the golden facade suggests. The echoes remain, faint but persistent. They are the quiet rustle of a story that refuses to be completely silenced, a testament to the people who lived and loved and survived in the shadows of the pharaohs. And sometimes, listening for the echo is the closest we can ever get to hearing the original voice. The moon is high now, a perfect silver disk reflected in the slow-moving water of the Nile. Your journey is coming to an end. The air has grown cool and the world has fallen into a deep and profound quiet. You find yourself in the ancient city of Thebes once more, but it is a city of the dead. You are in the Valley of the Kings, the secluded, sun-blasted canyon where the great pharaohs of the New Kingdom carved their own elaborate houses of eternity deep into the rock. By day, this place would be filled with the noise of tourists, the calls of guides. But now at night, it is utterly silent. The tombs are sealed, their decorated entrances lie dark, sleeping eyes in the pale limestone cliffs. Each one is a time capsule, a universe of belief and aspiration, a desperate, fabulously expensive attempt to defeat death and ensure the triumph of may it forever. Inside these tombs, the walls are covered with images of the pharaoh making offerings to the gods, of his journey through the perilous underworld, of his final, triumphant union with Osiris. It is the ultimate expression of the official story, a tale of divine order, masculine power, and eternal victory. You think back on your journey through the other Egypt, the one that existed in the shadows of these magnificent monuments. You think of the story of Horus and Seth, a divine scandal that revealed the culture's deepest anxieties about dominance and shame. You remember the quiet, intimate tomb of the two Manichaests, a silent, 400-year-old mystery of love and devotion. You can almost feel the terror of NTF, the weaver, as he fled into the desert, his social identity destroyed. You picture the desperate man slipping through the back alleys, trading his honor for a loaf of bread, and the powerful official who was a prisoner of his own perfect reputation. These stories are not carved on the walls of these royal tombs. They will never be found here. The men who lived these lives were not pharaohs. They were not gods. Their struggles were not epic battles against the forces of cosmic chaos. Theirs was a smaller, quieter, and far more human struggle. The struggle to survive, to find a space for themselves, to love, to endure in a world that had no place for them in its grand narrative. Their monuments are not made of granite and gold, but of whispers, fragments, and silence. A cool breeze rustles through the valley, the only sound in the vast stillness. It feels like the sigh of history itself. How many stories like this are lost forever? How many people lived lives of quiet desperation or secret joy that left no trace? The sands of the Red Land, the Desert, have blown over this valley for centuries, burying entrances, erasing paths, keeping the secrets of the dead. The sands of time do the same thing. They bury the stories of the powerless. They smooth over the uncomfortable truths. They leave behind only the grand, simple shapes of the monuments. As the first hint of dawn begins to pale the eastern sky, you take one last look at this city of sleeping kings. You came here seeking a forbidden secret, and what you found was something more profound. A powerful reminder that the official story is never the whole story, You found that beneath the most ordered and confident of societies, there is always a hidden transcript, a world of human complexity that bubbles just beneath the surface. And as the night falls over Thebes for the last time in our journey, you are left with the quiet, humbling understanding that the truest history is often found, not in what was proudly carved in stone, but in what was desperately whispered in the dark. And now the story quiets. The whispers from that ancient land begin to fade, carried away by the soft, slow current of the Nile. The heat of the Egyptian sun softens into a gentle, pleasant warmth behind your closed eyelids. The monumental stones of the temples and the pyramids feel distant now, dissolving into the soft landscape of your own approaching dreams. There are no more questions to ask. There is only this quiet moment, this gentle space between the story and your sleep. You can feel the weight of your body, a comfortable heaviness, sinking just a little deeper into the support beneath you. The rhythm of your breathing is slow and easy now, a peaceful tide rising and falling, washing away the last remnants of the day. The world of the pharaohs, with all its gold and light and its deep shadows, recedes, leaving behind only a profound sense of peace. You are drifting now, on a silent river of your own, toward a place of deep and effortless rest. The final word has been whispered. If your mind is still gently stirring, you're welcome to drift into another of my stories. If not, I wish you a deep and peaceful slumber. Good night.